a warm welcome to this session on DPI diplomacy. So, here we're going to look at how DPI has emerged as a tool for development cooperation and how it's strengthening ties between countries. Now, as we heard from Ambassador Mistry this morning, DPI has clearly been a runaway success in India. And given its low cost and inherent scalability, for several years now, there has been an interest among other nations to set up similar infrastructures as well. And here, India has played a steering role in terms of advancing dialogue and creating the cooperation mechanisms needed for these DPIs to be built. And just to give you some context here, since 2018, our MOSIP platform has helped over 20 countries develop their digital identity systems. The UPI payments platform, as we heard, is now available and used in 7 countries around the world, and there's a Government of India target to try and reach 20 countries by 2029. And very recently, we've also entered into a DPI partnership with Sri Lanka and are in talks with several African and South American countries to help them build their own UPI-like payment systems. But, it was in 2023 really that, as Rudra said, during the year of India's G20 presidency, we electrified the ecosystem, so to speak. And that was an action-packed year. And among other things, India entered into multiple MOUs with developing countries from the global south. We entered into a bilateral agreement with the EU, which wants to work with India to sort of make our respective DPIs more interoperable. And even the US has talked about providing global leadership when it comes to the implementation of DPI. So a lot happening there, and these were just a few of the highlights. But very impressively, the traction around DPI, the international traction around DPI hasn't died down with the end of the Indian presidency. It was a core focus of the Brazilian presidency as well last year. And now, even under the ongoing South African presidency, DPI and transformation is once again a focus of one of the central priorities of the Digital Economy Working Group. The other area, to end my opening remarks, where there's been quite a lot of action is the creation of normative frameworks around DPI deployment and governance. So we had the G20 framework during India's presidency. More recently, we've had a set of Quad principles. And even South Africa is working towards an integrated DPI governance framework. Now, we have an excellent panel to help us understand all these diverse strands better. And it's a pleasure to introduce Rohit Ratish, Sarah Akbar and Young, Erin Watson, Mr. Madhukar, and Sanjay Jain from the Gates Foundation. So we'll dive right into the questions for each of you. And we'd like to begin with you, Mr. Ratish. Now, you've been a champion of tailoring DPI solutions to the unique needs of partner countries. And what are the big trends you see emerging here? And also, how is DPI diplomacy and the interest around DPI emerging beyond the global south?
Thank you. Morning, everybody, and thanks to ORF in Carnegie, India, for doing this and having me. Look, I'll just step back a bit and just introduce what I do with the Ministry of External Affairs, and I'll tell you why that's important to answer this question. I head up 2 divisions. One is DPA 3, which looks at India's development partnerships abroad, essentially grant projects that we do abroad, primarily in the neighborhood, but also some in Africa, some in Latin America, and also some in the Pacific Island countries. And there's the second division, which is called the Rapid Response Cell, which is responsible for 2 things, essentially the evacuation of Indian nationals in distress abroad, and also the rushing of supplies of disaster relief to countries, our partner countries that are affected by disasters, conflicts, etc. So the reason I mention this is because from both divisions, I get a bit of a sense, in fact, or a map of how the global south interacts with India and with some of the challenges that they face at home and how they see India's role with regard to that. One of the things that we do at Rapid Response Cell is not just rush relief aid, but also food aid to countries. And we've done a lot of that work in the last few months, which only shows that there is a food security issue that is ongoing in the world. We also rush medicines. We send shipments of medicines probably twice every week, either by ship or by air, to our partner countries abroad. Um, so my sense is that, look, there are competing priorities for global South countries. They are going through a painful period, whether they are LDCs or lower middle income countries. There are the high costs of development capital, climate issues that sort of hobble their development plans, etc. So, to set this in context, a DPI has the potential to help them with some of these challenges, but our own approach has been to have these extensive conversations with our global South partner countries uh, on DPI, but also on larger issues of development. And I think we are at a stage today, compared to a year ago, where we've done a few things, and a few more things need to be done. What we've managed, number one, first and foremost, I think, and somebody in the earlier panel mentioned silos. I think there are silos in India as well. So, especially with respect to government, I think we've broken down one silo, which is essentially between the Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. And I think today we work very closely with Sanket and his team, with Secretary Krishnan and their team, Sushil Palsa. And I think that for us has been transformative. We are now in a position to not just have conversations or sign MOUs. We've signed 19 of them. The count is rising, but also translate those MOUs into meaningful action on the ground for our partner countries. Now, there are pilot projects at play here, with many countries now. I would say at least a few dozen countries. Foreign Secretary mentioned the deployment of UPI in some of our partner countries, and that's an ongoing effort. But uh, again, to say that we are championing the tailor making of DPI solutions for the global South, I think is making a bit of a virtue out of a necessity. Uh, we have to understand, if you're speaking from a global South standpoint, that there are those capacity challenges, there are those silo challenges, there are those priority challenges, and one has to be mindful and condition one's approach accordingly. And that is exactly what we're trying to do. Our there's a range of conversations that we've had even within Africa, and we see that every country's felt need, when we listen to them, is different, even within Africa. So we might be starting off on a DigiLocker pilot somewhere, but somebody else wants an upgrade in their payment system. Somebody else wants an upgrade in their digital identity, or they want to do a readiness assessment first or they want to do a capacity building program. The second part is the effort that both MEA and METI have put in to try and um, build out and integrate capacity building within our frameworks as part of the package that we can offer the global South. And in this, I must thank MOSIP and IIITB as well. Their DPI platform has now been integrated into MEA's ITEC flagship capacity building training program. I think in the next financial year, we will be in a position to dole out, or to at least present the option of a capacity building platform on DPI, by working with civil society and private actors within India. I think I'll stop here. Probably take a stab at the global North conversation also a bit. There is a lot of interest coming in from the global North to partner with India and its various actors in the area of DPI. And I think one of the aspects of that conversation has been funding. Funding is important, but I think at this stage, with all the challenges that the global South is facing, I think the idea would be to demonstrate the ability for a DPI approach to tackle some of the really daunting challenges that the global South countries are facing, And once that is demonstrated in a particular country, I think the funding options will show themselves up and can be tackled. A bit like crawling before you walk, right? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rohit. And in fact, your point about capacity building helps us segue to our next question to you, Sarah. Now, you're an educationalist and the former African Union Commissioner for Human Resources, Science, and Technology. So, really, do you think DPI partnerships need to include a strong element of digital skilling, literacy, capacity building more broadly? And do we really need to boost the capacity of local tech developers and users? And how should we go about that?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody in the hall. Um, Absolutely. Digital skilling and literacy must be integral to digital public infrastructure partnerships. If Africa is to fully harness the potentials of digital transformation, the vision of the African Union is in the blueprint of what we call Agenda 2063. Agenda 2063 is that vision of an African integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own skillful um, um, citizens able to play in the global arena. Now, if we have to play in the global arena, the world all over is speaking about digitalization, technology, STEM, etc. Therefore, it is important for us to also know what we are doing as Africans. And it is essential for us to join the world in this transformation that is taking place. In 2021, the African Union adopted the digital transformation strategy for Africa in the summit of 2021. Now, DPI provides the foundation for inclusion and innovation, and its success depends on the ability of citizens, businesses, and governments to effectively use and develop digital solutions. We heard much about this on how governments, businesses, etc., need to use it in order to transform their economy in the last session before the last panel before this. Now, how do we go about it? There is need for us to align DPI with Agenda 2063 aspirations and goals. Agenda 2063 is an agenda of 50 years adopted in 2013 with 50 years divided into 5 phases. We have just finished the first decade of 10 years, and now we have started the second decade. Now, the African Union's Agenda 2063 envisions a transformed continent driven by its own citizens, with aspiration one, a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, and aspiration three, an Africa of good governance, democracy, and respect for human rights. There are 7 aspirations in Agenda 2063. This agenda, aspiration 1 and 2 emphasize digital transformation as a key driver of socio-economic progress. The AU Digital Transformation Strategy 2020 to 2030 also highlights digital skills as a fundamental enabler. Now, to truly localize DPI in Africa, we must go beyond infrastructure and ensure one, widespread digital literacy to empower the citizens to engage with digital services effectively. And some of this is already being done in the finance sector, where we have payments done through Momo, Orange, etc. Technical upskilling to create a pipeline of African software developers and engineers and entrepreneurs who can build and maintain the DPI solutions. And of course, the inclusion of marginalized groups such as women, youth, and rural communities, so that we follow the leave no one behind concept. The second thing is to strengthen local capacity from users to innovators, because currently many African countries rely on external tech firms for DPI deployment. That was why I was very much interested in the Made in Africa panel that we had yesterday, because many governments will prefer to use how do I call them? They will prefer to use Europeans, etc., to do the digital thing, because they believe that Africans do not have the capacity. So there is need for them to strengthen the local capacity. There is need for them to integrate DPI into education systems, ensuring universities and TVET institutions offer courses on digital governance, fintech, cybersecurity, and of course, open source technologies. Then promote public-private partnerships where governments collaborate with local tech ecosystems to co-develop DPI solutions. The third aspect will be driving sustainable and inclusive digital transformation. It should leave the summit to the nations so that the nations should begin walking the talk and going beyond rhetorics. So we need a skilled workforce that will enhance DPI adoption by reducing dependency on foreign technology, create local tech jobs like we are having in India, and then foster data sovereignty, ensuring African countries control their own digital ecosystem. So a holistic approach to DPI partnership becomes very important because it will include digital skilling, number one, innovation ecosystems, and entrepreneurship support by embedding these elements. We align with Agenda 2063's vision of a knowledge-based economy, ensuring that Africa is not just a consumer of digital solutions, but a global leader in DPI development and governance.
Excellent, Sarah. Thank you so much for that. And, also thank you for bringing up that point about public-private partnerships, because that, in fact, is going to be the focus of the next bit of our conversation, for which, Erin, we'd like to turn to you. Now, DPI diplomacy is, on the face of it, a government-to-government exercise, really. But how do you think the private sector could support these engagements and the development of DPIs? And are there any examples or best practices that you can think of?
Bad start, but that's okay. Thanks very much for having me here. And it is a really great question. I just want to start by making two really quick points before I get to this, which is much more about how we make it happen, right? So the first one is about Australia and the second one is about India specifically. So on Australia, and I wonder if anyone from the Australian government is in the room here today. Please listen. I'm really, really, really worried about the way that we're going as a country at the moment. There are many reasons for that, and there are reasons we see all around the world: cost of living crisis, housing crisis, all of these kinds of issues. And one of my key things is that we're not remaining competitive globally. And I think that that's one of the reasons I really, really care about what others in the world are doing. One of the reasons I always love showing up to ORF conferences and hearing really what is the latest, because I think in Australia we tend to be a little bit inwardly focused in that sense. And so I take a little bit of a different approach where a lot of the conversation around DPI is about development, whereas sitting from the point of Australia, it's not. And I think that the comments from the woman who was at Swift on stage yesterday summed it up really sort of beautifully for me. And she said that when you have this proliferation of different payment systems, you risk financial fragmentation with this proliferation. The economy is not interoperable. Its pipeline and systems are not interconnected. And if that's not functioning properly, then the economy suffers. And so from my perspective, if we can't start to look at things like UPI and India as an opportunity, our economy will suffer because we're not keeping up with the way the global economy is going and how payments happen and which markets we can be tapping into and working with. In the India economic strategy, the Australia-India economic strategy that was updated just recently, DPIs were mentioned once. Payments were mentioned once. And it was in the technology and ICT section of the report, which just goes to show like how we're not thinking about India in this really progressive way when it comes to the India stack and payments and so on. And so what I would like to see from the Australian side is us looking at how we can actually start to have interoperable payment system with India. If Singapore can do it, if the UAE can do it, if France can do it, and these are stable financial systems, why can Australia not do it, and why are we not looking at it? The second point I just want to make quickly, a bit of a shorter way, is that obviously India has got to be commended for what it's done, and here in the way it is working with the rest of the global south to develop DPIs. And kind of going back to the SWIFT point again here, my main concern here is that if if we don't have these interoperable systems with India, we actually do risk even more fragmentation. You end up with a kind of China scenario where you have an economy that's relatively closed off. So these are the two things that really keep me up at night when it comes to DPI and payments and the Australia-India perspective. When it comes to who leads on this, in Singapore it was DBS, who that press release that came out, and it was your central bank, their central bank, and DBS. So they've gone, okay, we have this huge Indian population here who are sending remittances home. They want to be able to, use e-commerce and all these kinds of things back with India. If we are the bank that drives this collaboration between the two central banks, because that's fundamentally who needs to set this up and enable this, then we get the acquisition and retention of those customers. So from the Australian perspective, I want to see a bank say, we are going to lead getting UPI into Australia, unlock the economy for the Indian diaspora, which just enables the freer flow of payments and people between the two countries. The benefit for them is that every single Indian that comes to Australia will go and sign up with that bank. So it's home loans, it's car. This is how the economics and the commercial viability comes into it. So that's what I want to see on the Australian side, is looking at what Singapore did and so on, and having the private sector, having the banks lead on this and say, this is actually a really big opportunity for us.
Okay, okay, thank you for that, Erin. Now, in fact, we're going to switch away to the implementation impact side of things, which Mr. Madhukar, you've been very, very closely involved with and on the ground, really. So what do you see as the principal challenges, whether regulatory or execution level, when trying to set up DPIs in low and middle income countries? Because you've really been involved with quite a lot of this. So.
Thank you, Anirban. I want to start with an issue about global south and low and middle income countries as a framing. I believe in the digital world that we're building out for all of us around the world, whether it's the richer countries or some of the more developing countries, the capabilities that we are building out, and I'm Sanjay and Sharada here, who were part of the original construct of the India stack. Basically, what the India stack did was it's a combination of layers of capabilities. It's a capability of a presenceless layer, a paperless layer, a cashless layer, and a consent layer. Now, these capabilities are global south, global north agnostic. Every digital economy must have it, period, right? And so I want to break out of this global south mindset, because that's a very narrow framing and very limiting framing. And so I just want to begin with that. Having said that, I think the work that we have done at CoDevelop, along with many partners in this room, over the last couple of years is quite instructive on the point that Ambassador Gill mentioned earlier on the implementation of what we're all talking about. Fortunately, as through our many partners in different parts of the world, we have ongoing implementations in 22 countries right now on some part of DPI technology, right? And for us, as we look at the landscape, there's more hunger to do things, and which is where governments getting involved, along with government to government, with Government of India playing a role, will become increasingly useful. We've had ongoing conversations with the Government of India, and we hope we can double down and actually get some of this to work much more effectively in the years ahead. I think the work, we had two tracks that we started off with. One is the implementation of technology, and the other, again, with the UN ODET's office now, and it used to be the OSET's office, and UNDP led this work on inclusion safeguards and DPI, because we think DPI runs on two tracks. One is the implementation, one is the safeguards and inclusion. If one of the tracks doesn't work, the train will derail at some point. So we started on both. And this year we are hoping we'll do a lot more on the inclusion safeguards in about 20 countries, bottom up what they prioritize, how they want to think about inclusion and safeguards in their own countries. I think what we've noticed is that in all of the implementations that we are doing in different countries through our partners, defining the use case is often the most challenging thing, right? For instance, they say they want to do DPI, say, okay, now what is the beneficiary experience today? What do you want the beneficiary experience to be after this is implemented? And it's extremely difficult. It's like peeling layers of onions, of the onion to actually get down to the nub of the issue. And that itself takes a bunch of time. And then, of course, depending on the kind of DPI implementation you're doing, um, the timelines and the costs vary and so on. I think what we've noticed is while we talk about ID and payments and data exchange and so on, a lot of the countries, my friend at UNDP, Robert Opp, said, last year when G20 was going on, DPI is a technology first framing, right? And he said it's like blockchain for cancer survivors, cancer curing, and blockchain for missing people and so on and so forth. And DPI should not become a technology first framing. Can we take it more use case led framing? And I think what we learned from all of our implementations is unless we identify the use case we want to solve, DPI will not have an impact, right? So when I listen to something like a Euro stack and Africa wants to build its own stack, I've been having a number of conversations both in Europe and in Africa. The idea of a stack is evolutionary. It's not something you start off with, right? You start with the use case, you build a capability, and make that cut across all use cases and across departments and private sector and public sector. And so the framing of a stack is a supply side framing. Fortunately, in India, we've had the benefit of building it one layer at a time based on actual use cases we solved, and then over time it became a stack, right? So I think there's a whole bunch of learning that we can share with the world, and of course learn from what's going on in different parts of the world. We have a friend from Estonia here who led the work on digital transformation DPI for many years now, and so there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together and build things together rather than trying to become very parochial about one stack or the other. It's we are at a stage where the more we collaborate, the more we can deliver in countries and to make sure that people get the benefit. My one last point, I think in the age of government efficiency, as we've all come to know in the last month and a half, I think digitization, I think Ambassador Gill made that point very well, is a means to drive that inclusion and efficiency much more to really make sure it reaches everybody. Governments around the world, according to Gartner research, last year spent about $800 billion in technology, right? Digitization. Of the 800 billion, 88% of that was spent by what they call mature economies. That's about 35 countries in the world. If you want the 160 countries in the world to be able to have the same level of digital maturity that these mature economies have, there is just no financially feasible path to build that out, right? So infrastructure thinking, taking DPI approach to building stuff is the only way that's actually possible. So there's not even an argument whether DPI is the thing to do or not. There is just no other way, right? I'll pause with that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Madhukar. Now, for our last intervention, Sanjay, we turn to you, and we'd like to zoom out here a little, all right? And so what elements of the Indian DPI model do you think hold the greatest appeal for the world? And is DPI really helping inaugurate a new era of international cooperation? Do you see it that way? And what is the possible role of normative frameworks in helping give us a sense of direction as we go ahead with these partnerships?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to ORF and Carnegie to have me here on the stage. So, just sort of thinking back on the India journey, I think the fact is that we started this journey without the advantage of all of these frameworks. So when we started on the ID journey, we had a problem to solve, like Madhukar mentioned, which was actually related to direct benefit transfer and financial inclusion. And we clearly built a system that was going to do that. But in addition to that, we were very thoughtful about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to lay a foundation for multiple things in the future. So, which is why we looked out for what frameworks do exist. We discovered privacy by design as a set of principles that was already being discussed by then, but not really at the scale of government. We discovered GDPR. We looked at what is happening out there. And then we went back and said this is not sufficient. We actually enunciated a set of architectural principles that the tech must follow, which would then allow it to achieve its objectives and more. And that was what led to the Aadhaar journey. And even after we did that, I mean, so we had inclusion, we had data minimization, we collected very few fields and used APIs. We didn't want to have cards, but we purely digital. All of these were actually outlined in the architectural principles that were there right when we started that journey. And then that, having done that, we still went out and there was a lot of conversation in India around civil society participation. There was a Supreme Court case. So there were a lot of learnings on what could happen, might happen, etc. That then I think educated us back in terms of how we take this journey forward. In parallel to this, we had the UPI journey, which was again about inclusion. It was about interoperability. It was about bringing in private sector on top of the underlying framework. It was a common set of protocols. And so all of this was done prior to these global principles of what we call DPI and frameworks coming into being. And frankly, I think those have stood the test of time when we went out and had these conversations around the world, saying we've been on this journey, we've seen these advantages, and what can we think about taking to the rest of the world? And those principles keep coming up in every conversation. They're the bedrock for some of the safeguards work that we've seen, the frameworks you've seen around the G20 declaration and the Quad. All of them, in some sense, go back to that very thoughtful approach that we had in terms of how those principles help us accomplish the objectives of the state. And as a result of this thinking is actually where I think the term DPI has eventually come up. And our belief is that today DPI does make for a more efficient state. It reduces costs in the system. Aadhaar cost about $1 per person to implement and deploy, and so about a total of $1.5 billion. And the government's own estimates of its savings, and they only count savings one time, not every year, is about $42 billion. And this was the number I got a year and a half ago. I'm sure it's gone up by then from now there. And so, it gives significant ROI back to the government. That improves fiscal space. It allows you to do much more with the limited dollars that you have. And so it leads to a more efficient government. It's more resilient. We found in the pandemic that we were both able to put vaccines into people's arms much more effectively in a coordinated manner because we had DPI. But also we were able to deliver benefits to people within a moment's time because we, again, had those infrastructure pieces. So that actually leads to a much more resilient government. And so on many factors, if you look at the developing world, they're seeing all of this story. They've seen it play out. They say, we want that. And that because in this time when the amount of development capital is limited, how is it that we can take advantage of this trend to make sure that even in the limited fiscal space that is there for governments to operate, that they're able to do that? And in the meantime, the diplomacy that we mentioned, the digital diplomacy, is actually about all of these countries coming together, about India sort of being willing to share, about philanthropists, the multilateral bodies coming to say, hey, this is something that can actually help all the countries together. And that then becomes the backbone for saying, how do we allow countries to learn from these principles, to be able to adopt them into their economies, to implement them in a safe way, so that all of these lessons that have been learned by actually going down that path are then incorporated into that journey, and so that then people can benefit. So this is really, I think, the culmination in terms of thinking on that, to say, how do we help countries help themselves and do it? Because everybody's needs are different. But at the same time, we know that tech product building is expensive. So while you could pay the cost of building Aadhaar in India, not every country can do that. But then having open source products and technologies like MOSIP is a good example of that. You can actually get the capital cost of building it out done once, and then it's adaptable, which allows then countries to adopt it at a fairly low cost, almost an OpEx model. And so then you're able to take advantage of these efforts, and there may be more room. So that's where the DPG movement comes in for, again, other building blocks to come together so that then countries can use them as required. So, and that, I think all of this plays together very well, both the safeguards, the diplomacy, from the Gates Foundation, we are there to support all of these efforts. We have seen the DPGA come together with the 15/5 campaign to help countries take it up. We've had the Global Development Digital Compact, the work done by the OSAT, by UNDP. All of these partners is fabulous because it actually then allows all of this to come together in a very meaningful way so that countries can actually start to take advantage of it, deliver to their people, and also foster cooperation between countries. So I'll stop with that.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Sanjay. I think that ties together the rather different strands of our conversation very neatly. And we do have 10 minutes for questions, but Erin, I think you wanted to make one quick last intervention.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
In Australia, I still use this as my ID, right? Like I still walk around with my driver's license. We do not have a universal digital ID. And the reason I mention that is because of what you said about trying to break down this idea between North and South. We technically are in the global North in Australia, but we do not have these systems in place. We do not have a universal digital ID. And in fact, we are moving in many ways back to cash. There is a big movement around cash. If you walk into many shops, there's a big sign saying cash, please. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, there's a big political movement around transparency and trust with government. So where we have passed legislation to have a digital ID, it's like an absolute mess. And particularly around trust and transparency. When it comes to banking, the reason we don't like things like DPIs, although we do actually have a national payments platform, which is a DPI technically and it's free and whatever, is because of the concentration of banking in Australia and their power over legislators. So that's a whole another issue. But my point is that actually we need India. Like we really need to be working with you guys to understand how you've done it, how you've built these systems and brought people along for that journey. It's a very different context. But I really want to reiterate what you said is that we actually need to be at the table with you and hearing from you and learning from your expertise as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Now we have exactly 10 minutes to go and we'd love to take a few questions. Maybe we can take 3 questions or so.
Excuse me.
Oh,
this is Seiko again here on the side.
Hello. Okay.
Oh yes. Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm Seiko again from private equity from Manhattan. I'm just taking a little. Historically we have seen that technology, whenever it gets developed, we develop systems by which we can perfect and upgrade human life. Like for example, there was a evolution trajectory for computers. There was also for mobile networks. Suddenly, Steve Jobs discovered touchscreen, and everybody started, using it. So, and then we had a standard body which finally decided what could be telecom standards or PC standards or open standards. So now, while we are discussing about DPI, whether it is an Indian stack which is emphasizing financial inclusion, or the Singapore stack which is working more on trade efficiencies, or the UAE stack which is working upon more about investments, or something else, or SWIFT, which is enabling bank-to-bank transactions. Are those individual silos the DPI architecture that we would like to have? Or maybe you would guide me. Can we have a standards body? Is there a standards body which can say DPI can enable not just national priorities, but also international cooperation so that we can have something like net zero geopolitics and sovereign symbiosis as the outcome?
Okay, would anyone like to take that on the panel?
I should just take all the questions together.
Okay, let's take another 2 questions and then try and address them together. Okay, so we have one from there.
All right. Hello, everyone. A very pleasant afternoon to the distinguished panel and the members of the audience. My name is Vidushi Sinha. I'm a sub-editor here at ORF. Considering we're at the cusp of an AI-driven reality, my 2-parter question seeks to unravel and understand the applications of AIX DPI in healthcare and humanitarian aid. How do you think countries can leverage DPI to scale and integrate AI-empowered drone systems to transform critical sectors like healthcare, sanitation, and humanitarian aid? I'd like to cite the example of Kenya that has been partnering with Zipline to facilitate medical drone delivery systems, cutting down medical response from 1.5 hours to mere 30 minutes. What role do you think DPI diplomacy could play in fostering international collaboration, public-private partnerships, and knowledge sharing between India and its development partnership? in enhancing the deployment of such systems? And lastly, are there any specific caveats or challenges India ought to be wary of in this context? Thank you.
Okay, that was multiple questions, not one. If we could just request you to keep it to one short question in the interest of time. We'll take a third one. Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, mine is fairly straightforward. With the increased proliferation of DPI, especially cross-border initiatives, I'd like your comment on both data security and personal security. So infrastructure security from, let's say, DOS, hacking, etc., especially in a post-quantum era that can be foreseen. And personal data security, given that we link everything to, let's say, personal IDs and mobile phones, and there's already a growing trend of scams leveraging that data. Thank you.
Okay. So, Sanjay, would you like to take the first one, I think? Or any of them, really?
Actually, on the standards, I think there is a crying need for setting some of these standards into place. But generally, standards bodies take a long time to come to standards, and development is happening at a much more rapid pace. So we're still, maybe I would say, getting to the point of where we think standards can help. But if we put the standards before the development, you really would slow down the development effort. So what you've seen in the last 10 to 15 years would have taken probably about twice as long if you put the standards bodies before the thing. We saw that happen with the mobile phone as well, is that while there are telecom standards, there's still no mobile phone standard. There's an Apple phone and this Android, and it's really not a standard phone, but there is a standard telecom infrastructure. And so, which, undergirds the telephone requirements, but not the phone itself. So I would, there are individual standards around screens, around components, and we are actually seeing that with DPI. There are standards around the image formats, around biometrics, around authentication, the many layers. They're all standards based, but the next layer of standards, I think, is now at such a point they're starting to come together, and there's many conversations that I've been a part of which are really talking about how to make that happen, given that we're now at this mature stage where that makes sense. So I would say that. I'll let the others answer the other questions.
Okay, sure. Would someone like to? Yes, Sarah.
Okay. As per the question on health tech, I think I need to emphasize here that many African countries lack formal identifications. And that is why it is difficult to access healthcare services, where you can easily, in the US, you have your social security number. Anywhere you go to, once you put in that number, you're identified. You cannot run away. I think Nigeria, Kenya have such identification system. But imagine that in the continent where we have 55 member states, I don't think 3/4 of those member states have it. So it will be a bit difficult, but electronic health records, insurance, and mobile health platforms, even with insurance, how many people can afford insurance in Africa? Because how much are they paid? How much do they have? How much is the minimal wage? Because, when I sat there, all what I was thinking about is DPI. How relevant is it to Africa? Not that it is not relevant, it is very relevant, but how can we walk the talk? How can we walk the talk? Because can you imagine that the minimum wage in my country, for example, is 60,000 francs, which is less than $100. That is one. Now, digital IDs prevent duplicate records. Cameroon is going into that. Nigeria already has that. Kenya already has that. Rwanda already has that. And you know that the NIN, that is the National Identification Number for Nigeria, is linked to health services. And then when we talk about health insurance, it is difficult, but we have it in Kenya, where they call it MTIBA. MTIBA, that's what they call it. There they use it, and then they also have the mobile health wallet where you can save, send, and receive funds and all that. Then telemedicine and AI-driven diagnosis is also available, like baby AI in Rwanda. That's the example that we have. And then when we move on how we can walk the talk, working on this talk, you cannot. There's just no way. If the political will does not have the vision to implement this within the community, within the countries, then it will not be done. So if we speak DPI, the leaders have to see DPI, they need to work DPI, and they need to implement DPI within their various nations.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, for the third question, would you like to give it a shot?
Yeah, just a point that probably cross-cuts across a few questions that were asked, and to add to ma'am what you said. So essentially, as far as India is concerned, as far as the MEA as the implementing arm of the government of India's foreign policy is concerned, our development partnerships are premised on a philosophy of driven by demand. Essentially, we do not go out there and generally vocally advocate for certain things. Of course, in certain instances, we might, but usually the trend is we wait for our partner country to raise the demand formally through our missions abroad or in headquarters here, and make the problem statement to us. And if they've noticed that we've had the capabilities to deliver on those challenges. That's essentially a philosophy, and it has served us well, I feel, across the last 2 decades, because we have seen ownership of the projects and the initiatives that we have carried out in partnership with those countries, with the government. And of course, governments bring scale. Governments might require some time to convince all stakeholders within and outside, but the scale, the ownership, the sustainability, the viability challenges are usually surmounted by governments once there is buy-in. The second point I wanted to add was on health. I think India itself, over the last 7 or 8 years, has developed the Ayushman Bharat digital mission and the Aadhaar ID, and some of the challenges that she spoke to on health IDs and identifying the challenges in your health sector digitally and tackling them. I think India is beginning to do that at a massive scale, and one of the vectors of our diplomacy with regard to DPI and beyond, I think, is the digital health platforms that India has put out in the last 5 years. So whether it's ABDM or Saksham or Nikshay, Cowin, UN, etc., we are having active conversations with partners across the global south. There is interest, but there are also challenges that need to be met. Thanks.
Just a last, comment on the question that we had on I just on the data security and so on. There are two things that I learned in policy school. One is compared to what is the first question, and second is who are the winners and losers. And so we're making trade-offs every day. Right now, as we sit here, we're making trade-offs. And I often urge our friends who think about the important issues to think not in terms of risks, but trade-offs. Because risks are paralyzing, trade-offs are make you move forward, right? So I think there are lots of questions. There's important questions. I don't think we can answer it in like 30 seconds. But I will say that the implementation of technology and the trade-offs conversation has to emerge concurrently. It's not you do one thing and then think about the other. The work that countries are doing right now, when you talk of sovereignty and so on, there are lots of questions there that emerge. What are you giving up and for what? And can I afford to, given my geopolitical position, economic position, etc., and size of economy, can I do something differently, and what can I do? I think those are ongoing conversations. Doesn't have an easy answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think that brings us to the end of the panel. So please do give our speakers a round of applause. And,